I don't know. I don't think so. First time for everything.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining me today. I am pleased to be joined by Chair Fred Weatherspoon, who has chaired our task force on the advancement of law enforcement in Arkansas. And I also appreciate Secretary Jamie Cook's engagement on this and leadership role. Thanks, Colonel Bryant, for hosting us here and for your support of this effort as well. We have our task force committee chairs that have joined us today, which is Jimmy Warren, Sheriff Marty Boyd, Layla Holloway, and Sergeant Cody Williams. They all have been engaged with the task force, and I asked them to join us today for this presentation. We also have Gina Gomez, who is the Executive Director of El Centro Español, the Hispanic Center in Jonesboro. And I appreciate her engagement in the task force. And as you will see from the report and the listing of all the task force members, it was a broad array of highly distinguished law enforcement leaders, community activists, as well as elected officials that have been engaged in this project for the last 6 months or so. How this task force came about, as everyone remembers, after the George Floyd death, protests sprung up all across the nation, including here in Arkansas. Arkansas was not an exception, and we had peaceful protests. We had some challenges through the course of that, but as I met with some of the protest leaders, I heard some of the issues that they wanted to raise, and I said, you know, this makes a lot of sense. These are things that we ought to look at. And so we formed this task force. And this task force, as I said, is comprised of a broad array of people who believe in the importance of law enforcement, but also the importance of accountability, the importance of making sure that we have proper training of our law enforcement officials. And so this task force went to work. I asked Fred Weatherspoon, who is our director at the Law Enforcement Training Academy, to lead the effort. The goal was discussion, it was ideas, but yes, it was also action items that would come out of this. And again, it was to address the law enforcement training, discipline, accountability, but also recruitment and retention was a part of the work of this task force. The design, of course, is mirrored in the title of the task force, which is to advance law enforcement. And as I speak today, I want to assure our police officers all across Arkansas that we understand the risk that you undertake. We support you in the work that you do, and we understand your critical importance to public safety and the well-being of all Arkansans. And so with that, let me turn this over to Chair Fred Weatherspoon. Thank you, Fred, for leading this effort and for your hard work on this. I'll let you make your comments concerning the report.
Good afternoon. As Governor has spoken, this has been a tremendous honor for me to participate and serve in this role as chair for the task force. And I also want to thank the wonderful men and women that were a part of the task force. It was a pleasure to work with them. They were very engaged and committed to making sure that this report that we're going to submit at some point here in a second was complete, comprehensive, and representative of their passions and their concerns. And because of their good work and their willingness to have open and honest dialogue, that wasn't always without contentious moments, but I think that made it even more better, okay? Because everyone had a chance to speak their heart, and that was important for the success of this report, okay? And again, thank you for this time, and like I said, it was my pleasure.
All right, you got something to present to me?
At this time, I would love to present to you, sir, our task force report.
It's heavy.
And I hope that it'll help guide a lot of the conversations that you will have to have with probably legislators and other stakeholders in this venture. Thank you, sir.
Fred. Thank you, Fred. And I've received, as everyone knows, I really have utilized task forces as my time as governor. And I can't remember the last time I had a task force report that was this comprehensive, that was this thorough. This includes 27 different recommendations, and it takes a while to get through this. And this task force report will be put on the Department of Public Safety website this afternoon, so this will be available for everyone to read, review, study, and analyze. And I wanted to make boil some of this down to some specific action items that we want to take on in the next legislative session, which comes in January. And first of all, One of the recommendations, which I accept, is to increase the ratio of full-time to part-time officers. The proposed legislation will limit a law enforcement agency to 2 part-time officers for every full-time officer. Why is this important? It is important for training purposes because part-time and auxiliary officers are not required to go through the police training academy. And so by limiting the number of part-time or auxiliary officers, you are enhancing the number of those that will have the requisite amount of training that is important for public safety, for accountability, and to make sure that we deal with the diverse communities in the right way. Part of the next proposal is that we will enhance the accountability for excessive force, dishonesty, or deceit in the performance of duties. Right now, there has to be a mandatory report to the Commission for Law Enforcement Standards and Training if you fail to do certain things, if you fail to meet the minimum requirements, if you violate state or federal law, and a few other things. But amazingly, it is not required to make a mandatory report if an officer is fired and discharged for excessive force use or for dishonesty or deceit. And so this legislation will make those as mandatory reporting items to the Commission. That way, if someone wants to hire an officer, you can check that database. You can see if they've ever used excessive force or been discharged for dishonesty or deceit. These are critical elements of accountability and making sure that we have the right people on the street protecting our citizens. The third recommendation that will be part of our legislative package will be to give the Commission for Law Enforcement Standards and Training authority to require new law enforcement agencies to have a full-time police chief. Now, to put this in perspective, right now there are approximately 20 departments in Arkansas that does not have a full-time police chief. And what that means is who's in charge, what level of training do they have, what are the reporting requirements and accountability and oversight. And that's fundamental in law enforcement. And so this will be a requirement that every police agency have a full-time police chief. And I think that's important for the proper functioning of police and their training and their oversight. There are recommendations that also deal with what we need to do better to recruit and retain quality police officers. One of the recommendations is that the salary of police officers should be comparable at least to the median income in Arkansas. Well, one is you got to measure that municipality by municipality as to where the differences are. That is an aspirational goal. It's a recommendation, and we're going to have to work toward that as a state. But clearly they point out we need to do better in terms of taking care of our police officers, their financial needs, because that will help us to recruit better officers and more highly trained officers and to keep them. And part of this is a recommendation that all of our retirement systems move from 30 years or whatever the years is now, 28 years, down to 25 years in terms of service before retirement. It's going to take us a while to get there because there's some big cost items there, but we're going to start with legislation that the state police retirement package will be from 30 years of service down to 28. That's part of the recommendation of this task force. There's other recommendations that can be done without legislation, and one of them would be to increase mandatory annual bias training from 2 hours to 4 hours. We're doubling the amount of training for bias alerting, for making sure we understand the importance of non-biased policing. We want to develop programs that, in cooperation with community leaders and faith-based leaders, to bring law enforcement more in touch with their community, make it a part of the community. I know in my early conversations with many of the community leaders here that this is something you wanted. You wanted police officers that were engaged in the community and part of it and understood the community. So that would be part of the recommendations that come out of there. They want to have a more consistent awareness of the crisis stabilization units and to expand those. And this will be something that we can do, we're working toward doing, which allows us to not arrest everybody that has a mental health issue that might also come in violation of a portion of the law. It allows us to identify those with a mental health issue and provide treatment and alternative care for them. There was a recommendation to support a strong bilingual know your rights and what to do when you're pulled over campaign. There's many people that really do not know, one, what their rights are if you're stopped by a police officer, but also what is the proper conduct and how you should respond and what is expected. And this will reduce friction and confrontation if we just simply understand each other more. I think that was a very good recommendation. And so there's many different recommendations. Those are just a couple of highlights. One of them is mentioned to increase the use of body cameras across Arkansas in the different police agencies. I know everybody's trying to move toward that. We want to be able to provide assistance in obtaining grant money so that can become a reality. So those are a couple of highlights that we'll be working on. And now let me ask our committee co-chairs, if you just come to the microphone one after another. Chair Jimmy Warren, followed by Sheriff Marty Boyd, Layla Holloway, and then Sergeant Cody Williams. If you all could come make your comments.
Thank you, Governor. I want to take a point of privilege for thanking the Governor for having that difficult conversation back at Mosaic Templars back in June after the nation exploded amongst the death of George Floyd. From there, just having the bravery and the foresight to have this diverse committee to look at a top-down approach with grassroots people who were there on the ground that wanted to see policing reform in Arkansas and how to support our officers, but also hold them accountable. I was the chair of Committee 1, and we looked at training, policy, and operation as it relates to race and community relations in the community. In our task force, in our committee, you will see things that came about as recommendations for the body cameras. You saw us look at how 287G expanded and affected the Hispanic community. We also talked about the implicit bias training, cultural competency training, de-escalation training, and duty to intervene. There's a recommendation made that those are standardized and implemented for the state of Arkansas, so every officer in the state will have that trainings. One of the big things that really came from our recommendation is looking at our crisis stabilization units, as the governor just talked about. On the ground, there was a lot talking about having social workers that were there in the police departments, having people who were trained in human interaction when they dealt with people. The great thing about Arkansas is we were already ahead of the curve, and we have pieces in place with these crisis stabilization units, so we're actually helping people get help rather than penalizing them for a system that has hurt them. Overall, both professionally and personally, I was blessed and humbled just to be on this task force and be in the room with individuals from law enforcement, individuals who are college students, individuals from all different walks of life. And the great thing about it is we were able to put our egos to the side, our own ideas and thoughts that we may have felt were the best. We were able to move those to the side and come up with a cohesive plan that really is going to move the state of Arkansas forward and make us a national model for what police reform looks like.
Good afternoon. First off, I want to say what an honor it is to serve on the task force, and I want to thank the governor for allowing me to do so. His leadership to our state and also the law enforcement community is seen every day, and I appreciate him so much for that. I was a committee chair of discipline and accountability in law enforcement. The governor has covered a lot of the topics that we discussed in that. One thing is it's close to my heart when we talk about the accountability and discipline of law enforcement. I've been a veteran for 30 years of law enforcement in Craighead County, and there's no one out there that wants a bad police officer off the streets more so than the good police officer. And we look at that every day and say, how do we keep our quality, moral, upstanding officers working and employed, doing the job they're doing? And where we have that accountability, where if they're not doing their job properly, how do we move them along outside of this career path? And I think with the recommendations that the governor covered, we're going a long way with that. Mr. Warren covered also that I'm happy to say in that part, Arkansas is ahead of the curve of most states. We have a lot of things already established in the state dealing with our law enforcement community, how to orchestrate departure, I should say, out of this career path, and where that a lot of states are not able to do so. So like I say, it's a good thing that we are ahead of the game, but also the recommendations that y'all will see today will actually better the professionalism of our careers. Thank you.
All right, hi, I'm Layla Holloway. I was the committee chair for Committee 3, which dealt with community policing. I also just wanted to start off by saying thank you to the governor for allowing me to have, take part in this amazing opportunity. I'm a college student, so this isn't something that, college students get to do every day. And so what we did on community policing is we really took an emphasis on the study and analyze section of it. And so what we did was we created a survey that went across the state of Arkansas. We had gotten 2,000 responses, and we were able to take those responses and analyze them to find the best way to kind of, mend those relationships between law enforcement and communities within Arkansas. And so based off of the findings from our surveys, we were able to make recommendations such as, intentional efforts between, community members, community organizations, and law enforcement to really try to mend those gaps. Stuff such as, increasing the amount of time that law enforcement officers spend within their communities. And so through that, we were able to actually find ways that we can hopefully, mend those gaps between the community members and law enforcement. And again, it was an amazing opportunity to be able to do something like this at such a young age with amazing people. Be able to be with elected officials. I made a lot of friends on this task force, along with being able to, advance the state of law enforcement in Arkansas. So it was an amazing experience. Again, thank you, Governor, for allowing me to take part in this, and thank everybody, for following us and making sure that, we also are holding ourselves accountable as well. So, thank you.
I'm Cody Williams. I was the co-chair of Subcommittee 4. We were tasked with assessing benefits, resiliency, but mainly those two things on our subcommittee. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the governor for putting this task force together. It was a pleasure to work with all these folks. We looked at a lot of different things. Unfortunately, our subcommittee probably cost the most money. but those things have to be looked at. We want to, not only do we want to keep the bad guys out, as Sheriff Boyd said, we want to keep the good guys in the profession. And with that, we have to look at benefit packages. We have to look at pay. We have to look at all these things. So we have a diverse set of recommendations for the governor on that. Things ranging from a portion of a police officer's income being exempt from state income tax to state institutions of higher learning, providing tuition to law enforcement officers for free so we can educate our officers better, to hopefully over time getting the average starting salary up from $28,000 a year to something more comparable of the average median income, like the governor mentioned. But there's a host of great ideas in there, and hopefully we can implement them. Thank you.
Thank you, Cody. And I just want to tell all the task members how proud I am of you, not just your presentations today, but your participation, your leadership, and what you mean to Arkansas. And I also want to recognize Gary Sipes of our Executive Director of our Chiefs of Police Association. You've been a good partner in this, and it'll be very important in implementing this. And then Scott Bradley with the Sheriff's Association also has been a tremendous partner. With that, we'll turn it over for questions.
I guess one of the biggest questions would be, what's the financial impact going to be? Obviously, more training is a good thing, but more training costs, and how do we take care of some of those real small rural departments when it comes to training and the finances involved with that?
I'm going to ask Secretary Cook to comment after I talk for a minute to give her time to think. There is cost with all of this. Some of these items can be addressed without cost, which is in changing training protocols, but there are other cost items that are clearly large ticket items that's going to have to be accomplished over time. One of the specific things that you worry about in cost are the body cameras, because it's not just the equipment itself, but it is the software that it takes to maintain that and to search the cameras and the pictures from it. So there's a significant cost to those, and that's shared with each department that might adopt that. So, you know, from the state perspective, we might be doing grants. That remains to be seen, but we want to look for ways that we can partner to make these investments possible. Secretary Cook?
So I believe your question was specifically related to training. So when I tell you that there's going to be no cost associated with any of those recommendations, that's only for the ones pertaining to training, because certainly the other recommendations would cost quite a substantial amount of money. So the beauty of transformation is that we were able to, under one umbrella, combine the Commission on Law Enforcement Standards and Training, the Arkansas State Police, Crime Lab, ACIC, and other entities under one umbrella, which means we get to utilize each other's resources. And so to increase the training hours, we've got subject matter experts right within our state to develop those curriculums. And to do that online, we get to use the colonel's videographer and develop those things online, and then we put them on our learning management system. And every officer in the state of Arkansas has free access to our learning management system, which has a couple hundred hours of training. So we'll be able to do that without any cost.
Thank you, Jamie. Yes.
Conversations with legislative leaders yet, and how those, if you have, how they gone? On the policies that will require some type of legislative action?
We've had some preliminary discussions with them. I do believe that there will be broad interest and support, but they will want to go through their hearings and their debate on it. And I know also that there's a number of legislators that are working on different kinds of packages, and so hopefully this will help shape it. And I expect to have good support among the General Assembly on this, particularly with the law enforcement community and the activists, the leaders that are here that will showcase how this is a good balanced approach.
Which of the changes do you see as the most urgent for our state's law enforcement?
Each one of the task force members might have a different priority that they would reference, and so I don't want to speak for them, but to me the most urgent are those that are doable. And for example, without legislation, we can increase the bias training, doubling that. That's important, that's critical. We can pass the legislation, which I think is very critical about the accountability, and I would probably point to excessive use of force as a critical mandatory reporting item as being one of the most important.
Was there anything addressed in possibly changing just the culture of policing in general, whether it be, you know, I wouldn't say ratting would be the way to go about it, but you know, turning other officers in for bad stuff? There always seems to be some hesitancy amongst officers to actually do that, but that's just kind of one of the bigger items. But just culture change in general.
I'm going to, Fred, you want to take that on there?
If I'm correct, you're speaking mainly to the duty to intervene concept? Okay. Yes, there were a lot of discussion regarding the duty to intervene by officers in Arkansas particularly, and we all agree that due to our training and our integrity issue, that it's a must that if we see an officer doing something that he or she is doing outside the scope of their routine or policy procedure, that we should step in, okay? And we are committed to do so.
Jimmy, when he asked about the priority, do you want to articulate what your top priority would be?
Yes, sir.
I don't know if the question is which one to do immediately. I think, as the governor said, it's about which ones are doable. There's a handful of items on here that some of the stuff you'll already see has already been gone into play. As big as it is for the state of Arkansas, a lot of these task force items can be brought about through community conversations. These are things that someone like myself, who's just an ordinary citizen, can go have conversations with my mayor and my chief of police and those in charge and start the ball rolling on getting these things done. So like implicit bias training, cultural competency, duty of intervene has already been implemented in Conway just by a stroke of a pen. So there are action items that you can start as a citizen and have conversations about with your local municipalities and get those things done very quickly.
Did I get your question?
Yeah, was there a recommendation regarding a ban on chokeholds?
Fred?
Again, there was conversation regarding chokeholds, but since we don't advocate chokeholds in the state of Arkansas, and we don't teach it, advocate it in any way, there was never a recommendation presented to ban something that we don't utilize.
It is not banned, it's just not taught.
No, we didn't make a recommendation to ban it.
Why?
Well, again, for the simple reason that we do not advocate it, we don't teach it, and I guess really, sir, to be honest with you, we didn't feel that it was something that we had to just hit a lot on, because we were all on the page that it's not something that we support.
But if an officer did it, it wouldn't be something.
If
that
an
they
officer
would-
used use of force in a situation that's not warranted, he or she would be subject to the same type of investigation and possible disciplinary action if it was not deemed a deadly force scenario.
Secretary Cook has something to add here.
Yes.
While we did not specifically say chokeholds are banned, chokeholds already are if they're objectively unreasonable. Any tactic that a law enforcement officer uses in the state of Arkansas or across this country that is not objectively reasonable is illegal and in fact a crime. So it's already outlawed. Also, President Trump issued an executive order. Gary, when was that? That was several months ago. That's included in our final task force report. And it does require officers to set in place a policy that bans chokeholds unless deadly force is needed, is necessary. And so all the agencies in Arkansas have to submit their policies for certification, or they won't receive any federal funding. So that was kind of addressed specifically at the national level. So it's in the report, but not as a specific recommendation.
All right. Thank you all very much for your participation here today. Y'all have a good afternoon. Thank you.